right. Hey guys, welcome to another Note to File Live. It is Tuesday at noon Eastern. Off to a fun week, dealing with the flooded clinic and a bunch of other cool stuff. But all that aside, go ahead and bring up our guest here this week, Ignacio Handal.
Hey, Brad.
Hey, man, and co-host at this point, official or otherwise, Dr. Fox. How's it going,
hey,
guys?
Brad. Good morning. Happy Tuesday.
It's better than Monday so far, so
Yeah.
I'll take that.
Yeah, one day closer.
Yeah.
That's right. Well, very cool. Iggy, man, it's been a lot of back and forth. I'm glad we're finally getting you on here. We recorded the audio podcast. It has not dropped yet, but stay tuned for that. Should be here in the next few days. Hey, man, first of all, I don't think I said this during our audio recording, but congrats on the Christine Pierre Lifetime Achievement Award. Very cool.
Thank you. Appreciate it. Very humbling. I appreciate it.
Wow.
Yeah, that's awesome.
Congratulations.
It's all yours next year, Brad. You got my vote.
Yeah, we'll see. I'm not making a lot of friends out there, but that's okay. Anyways, just like everybody, I want to have you tell us a bit about yourself. Give us your background, if you would. I always like to hear people's sort of clinical trial origin stories. We all kind of get here in funny ways. So, if you would, tell us about your background and kind of bring us up to where you are today.
Sure. Been doing clinical research for about 20 years. We own a couple CNS research sites in the southern United States. We provide clinical research services mainly around CNS and psychiatric drugs. We've probably done the phase 2 or phase 3 studies for about 85% of the drugs that hit the market in the last 20 years.
Wow.
We're a really high enrolling site, high quality data coming out of our site. And one of the reasons that we have been so lucky is because of this tool we've developed called Clinicom that we've been commercializing now for the last 2.5 years. But it's been in development for nearly 20 years. So, we're really proud to be able to offer Clinicom, which is the world's only augmented intelligence to be able to screen somebody anywhere in the world remotely for up to 80 conditions from one adaptive intelligence that's based on the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual for Psychiatry. And we're leveraging that now into the life science space. We've been using it at our own research center for a long time to pre-screen patients and to make sure they meet inclusion exclusion. But now we're using that in a wider sense.
I mean, I love this. Obviously, as you can imagine, a little bit of a soft spot for technology that's sort of incubated at sites, right? I mean, it just seems so intuitive in sort of solving a lot of the problems we see, which I think are a lack of understanding of like the real problems on the ground. So there's a lot of tech out there. I'm sure it's super cool. A lot of it is, but a lot of it's not, really solving the true problems, or if it is, it's also creating a bunch of other downstream problems. I think there's something unique about, there's a few other, good examples out there, but, I really have this sort of soft spot for that, tech that's coming or derived from the site, right? I mean, I don't know why we don't see more of that. So first, congratulations and kudos on that.
Well, and the specification for psychology and psychiatric, I mean, that's huge. The psychiatric world, the CNS world is really exploding. I'm sure psychedelics are definitely going through the pipeline. It's something that you're looking at. And I think that this could be something that could be really helpful, especially if you have that worldwide reach that you were talking about.
Yeah, we're actually have a couple sites that are entering in the psychedelic space and a couple small pharmas that are using our tool to gather some data, both for screening for their studies, but also data through the studies in a decentralized fashion as well. I know a lot of people talk about real world evidence and data gathering, but if the technology has not been in the space, understand how to work in the space and how to partner in the space, it becomes very challenging. Luckily, we've had that experience to leverage a little bit.
So how broad is the reach now for Clinicom?
We actually have a location, at least in each of the in 6 continents.
Wow.
We're in about 32 states at this point. So anywhere from a small psychologist, psychiatric office just looking to screen their patients for pre-screening before they actually see the patient, to research centers, to large academic centers. Like Syracuse uses us at 56 of their campuses for all their student telehealth screenings. So the cool thing is for us is psychiatry has been marred by subjectivity since the beginning of time, right? And so we're really bringing equity and access to all, and we mean that when we say it, in the sense that instead of meeting your psychiatrist for the first time, not feeling comfortable disclosing very sensitive information, you can take a Clinicom and have a transportable report that you can share with any mental health professional that details your entire current mental status. And in most states and most insurances are now covering the review of Clinicom. So it's actually something that can, generate a little bit of revenue off of as well.
Nice. That's very cool. So yeah, then who are your customers? And I mean, sites, and even are you working directly with CROs and sponsors at this point as well?
So we have a few partnerships with some mid-sized CROs, but it's a lot of sites, CNS sites, and the main customer line is anybody who treats CNS patients. So anybody from an emergency room to primary care, pediatricians, anywhere that CNS patients are seen, psychiatric patients are seen, from inpatient to outpatient to substance abuse centers. We even have some security companies that use our product to screen people for violence and aggression screening to see if they're going to give them a gun or not.
Nice.
We're starting to work with some police departments and school boards that are wanting to screen students in population health screenings. So I think we're the only tool where you can say, hey, give me 1 million people. We'll send a link out to everybody and triage the list of who's suicidal, has violent aggression tendencies, who has this, that, and the other, and actually triage the list to see where they need to go first. An example would be, we're not working with the VA yet, but an example would be the veterans, 22 suicides a day. They don't know what's going on until they actually hit the door after waiting 16 weeks of who they need to see. So we can actually, pre-sort that list and kind of, triage it by the severity of the conditions.
No, that's awesome.
Wow.
Obviously, it sounds like there's a wide application here. So I love that too. And if are you guys watching? I see you out there. Make sure to throw in your comments in, and we'll get to them. We always love engagement from the audience. Iggy, man, let us look under the hood.
Yeah, sure.
Let's see, take a look and see what we got. I'm actually excited to take a look and
so
get it out
before
there.
I kind of share the life science product, I want to just kind of share the general Clinicom that's just used for screening and assessing, and then we can dive into the life science application, which is kind of layered on top of the core Clinicom product. But in essence, Clinicom is a tool to assess and screen a patient, prior and during the assessment process. So in the general psychiatric space, or in any general intake space of assessing a patient for the first time, we're gathering a big litany of information from the patient. And basically what happens is the patient is sent via email or text or both an invitation to create a secure account. We encrypt things at twice the level of most banks. We educate the patients before they actually take the assessment that all their PHI is decapitated, and their answers to questions are stored in a different physical IBM secure server location. So in worst case, if we're ever hacked, they'll have answers to questions and not have any idea, who these people are. So we get some really revealing data on patients, and we offer free trial on our website. So if anybody's watching and like to check it out, just register. It costs you nothing. You don't have to put in a credit card to play with it.
Nice.
So one of our main things is equity and access to care for all people in all countries. And this is available in a couple languages as well. So I could technically send this to you, Brad, in Portuguese and read it back in English. So, like I said, equity and access is a big deal for us.
That's awesome.
Yeah. But in the summation of it is, you send the Clinicom link through the portal, just enter phone number and email, hit send. The customer gets a very custom tailored email or text from the location, not from Clinicom's. Let's say you're Dr. Bob, and say, Dr. Bob, it wants you to take a secure assessment to better evaluate your condition before you're seen. The patient fills it out. Clinicom is not a survey, so it's not, here's 3,000 questions, fill that out. It's an adaptive augmented intelligence that asks the appropriate questions of the appropriate patients, and we screen for 80 conditions. So everybody's assessment is different. The questions they're faced are different. As you answer questions, different doors open and close. So you get to see, it's basically ensuring that we screen for 80 conditions and we don't drop any balls, as we say it. The main output, let me actually go to a different patient here. So we'll go to the patient portal. I'll pull it up a little bit more complicated example of a veteran. so you guys can see what a very complex report looks like. So this example, you can see maybe if you haven't seen this patient before, haven't ever encountered this person, at the summary page, you can look at the conditions they have flagged for and which are the most severe. So for a clinician, you might uncover some of these things 5 visits in, 6 visits in, 2 years later, you might uncover that they have PTSD after they've opened up and actually told you. Or you may, visit, that on the 2nd or 3rd visit. But with Clinicom, you get to see it before the patient even walks in the door. Our main product and our goal is to help clinicians lower the workload burden of documenting their CNS cases or their psychiatric cases. So we do provide narratives. So the system does auto-generate EMR narrative that is not an EMR template, but this is actual AI derived narrative based on the symptoms that the patient has reported in the system. I guess the key part of the product is the report itself, which is a very detailed report on the person's case or case history. So we do collect current past medications, a summary of all the conditions they may have prompted and triggered within our algorithms. So you can pretty much get a complete, as we do in clinical research, a complete baseline. And sometimes in CNS studies, the baselines are little check boxes on an inclusion-exclusion check list that says, PI confirms patient is not OCD or not bipolar. And sometimes the clinician actually digs in and checks, and sometimes they just check a box. But with Clinicom, we remove all that subjectivity and move everything to objective data collection based on the standard, which is the Diagnostic Statistical Manual. So I guess the magic sauce for us is we took the thousands of criteria in the DSM and the Diagnostic Statistical Manual for Psychiatry, which has 0 questions for patients in it. And we created a first person, third person, and pediatric version question of each of the criteria. And we copyrighted that back in 2008. And obviously we updated for all the new versions of the DSM. So we basically own the patient facing questions that align to the standard. So the report is pretty expansive. And obviously this is all auto-generated, so the clinician doesn't have to lift a finger. All they have to do is enter a phone number and email. The patient completes it. We have a 94% completion rate. The patient does this on their own time. They can log in and out. It could vary from a 15-minute assessment to the average is 28 minutes. But we have some patients that may take 40 minutes to complete it because they have very complex cases. So it's tailored to each individual. And so the summary page just shows you kind of which conditions they flagged for with a heat map. It also captures information about the chief complaints that they're experiencing with a lot of detail. We do have some standardized assessments in here we call a control arm, and that's really for our testing purposes to validate and to show that our algorithm is a little more sensitive than the current status. And the first condition on the screen here is ADHD, and it actually will tell you right underneath the blue header if the patient met criteria per the DSM for the condition. So, imagine a telemedicine visit where the doctor's, sharing this on the screen can validate the information with the patient as they're looking at it. And then at the very bottom, there's a diagnostic feature where the doctor can then accept, reject, or rule out the suggestion. So we are not a diagnostic tool. We're an information gathering platform, clinical decision support. So the doctor or clinician is driving at all times and making the clinical decisions. We're just presenting data and letting the doctor decide. What's really cool about this is this has an actual function of educating the system and making the system smarter. So we didn't even try to release this until we had 250,000 cases in our database, and that it was sensitive and specific and published in peer-reviewed journals. But then the clinician can also modify after they've accepted something, change the severity, accept it or reject it, or add some notes. So the point is the clinician's driving and looking through the data and saying, I believe it, I accept it, or I don't. There's also some really interesting, features where the patients can actually detail out some narratives and put in what they've witnessed with in their own words, what they're experiencing and what they've witnessed. So in this PTSD section, you can see it's pretty, elaborate. This sample patient that I have on the screen is a combat veteran that has, several conditions triggered. And obviously, if in this example also, you can see for anorexia, it says does not meet criteria, and there was only one question presented. Really, realistically, it might have been two, but you can open up the question set and see what potential questions they would have gotten. And the reason for only a couple questions in certain sections is the DSM requires some criteria to be met to even consider a diagnosis. So if you're say no to 2 or 3 of those, then why ask you 20 more questions about it, right? You don't meet it by the rule book. And so, the report is very exhaustive and very detailed. It goes through 80 conditions in the diagnostic manual. Every patient doesn't get presented with the same sets of questions. They're driven by their chief and secondary complaints and then how they answer questions. It opens up other tree branches. So you might see a report that's a lot shorter than this. You may see some that are a little bit longer. We do capture everything from the history to, sexual development, early past, current psychiatric histories. Let's say an example would be if you were in the military and you said you were hit in the head, it would trigger the TBI algorithm and the military history algorithm, which would ask you military history, deployment information. So if you're a veteran, I hear a lot of veterans saying, I've told Clinicom my story one time. I never have to open up the Pandora's box again. I just hand the report to my clinician. And that really saves them a lot of trauma of having to relive all that stuff over and over again as they're getting passed around the VA system. It does capture their support system, the stressors in their life, down to their education, and even down to their quality of life. And obviously this can be integrated into an EMR. We're on the Epic App Orchard. We're integrated through HL7 and FHIR into most common EMRs. But the really interesting part about this is, patients can now be assessed and managed prior to showing up to the clinic and triaged by severity. So you can see the patients you have to see in advance. So we have warnings for suicide, violence, aggression, and other triggers that they can set up. But the clinician can then graph their outputs and say, hey, I wanted to kind of talk to you today, Brad, if you were my patient, about how your sleep and your depression's been going. And I noticed in the last visit, things have gotten a little worse. There's a lot of people out there talking about real world evidence and value-based care, metric-based care, but they're using, in my opinion, the wrong tools. For example, in mental health, we see a lot of people and a lot of vendors out there just using PHQ-9s to screen for depression. Well, the problem with doing that is almost like in life sciences or in clinical research. Imagine if we randomize a patient without doing a proper screening and baseline and just started handing people PHQ-9s. And that's kind of what's happening in the real world. People are sending PHQ-9s to patients to assess them. And the PHQ-9 asks 9 simple questions about depression, but nobody's actually checked the actual DSM standard and all the other criteria, temporal or otherwise, to see if the patient actually is depressed. So what happens if you have some depressive symptoms on a PHQ-9, but your depressive symptoms are really fed from insomnia or social anxiety disorder, and nobody stopped to check? Nobody stopped to check the other 12 conditions that could be feeding into your depressive symptoms. So Clinicom is the only system that I'm aware of that can screen for those 80 conditions and actually tell you what all is feeding those symptoms, so the clinician can actually triage and sort out what's what and what's the priority. So like the example would be not to get a bipolar patient that presents depressed on a PHQ-9 into a depression study, which, you put a handful of bipolars into a depression study, you just skewed all the data in your study. So, we do have a lot of other features in here, capturing all their medications, current, present, just like you would in a clinical research study. We can also set up amazing follow-ups. And as you accept and reject a diagnosis in the diagnosis feature I was showing a minute ago, the system actually auto-generates a follow-up that is tailored to that patient. So because you accepted or rejected the conditions, the system then can auto-generate in the regular clinical setting a follow-up that is tailored to that patient. And you can set this up at whatever frequency and cadence that you'd like. Let's say we repeated this in a study, let's say it's 10 times once a week, right? You never have to set it again. But for the life sciences, we actually hard code this into a study. So we get the visit schedule, the assessments they want to do, input their inclusion exclusion, and pretty much digitize the source, if you would. And this can be piped into an electronic data capture as well. We have a huge litany of, it also suggests scales. So because you accept a depressive disorder, you might want to follow up with a HAM-D or other conditions here. We do have a huge library of standardized scales aside from our DSM scales that also can be added as a follow-up. So these are all tools that we use in clinical research on a regular basis, and also a huge list of social determinants of health and other informational data that you can gather, from quality of life to stressors, to do the follow-ups. So the system is pretty robust and was set up to be able to use really in any setting, from a school to an emergency room. And it also offers an amazing array of statistics on the patients. So you can actually see the output of your clinic, to see what conditions you have. This is helpful for life sciences to see, what your population look like, what other comorbidities do they have, and really look at, this is a sample clinic, one of our actual clinics that we own, with 6,000 patients, and we're seeing about a 96% completion rate. So you have about 12% in flight, 84 are already done, and only 3.5% are not completed, which you can really look at the conditions that your site is seeing. So that maybe help you better address which studies would be appropriate and where you have populations to look at. So no more sorting through your database. We can actually auto score that for you. Everybody talks about value-based care, but here's an example of measuring some depression scoring over time for this location. So you can do this by clinician, provider, location, or even look at intra-conditional comorbidities. So I can pick, let's say, ADHD from the scale and look at all the comorbidities that our ADHD patients are having. So this is really helpful just from driving on the analytics and data side. But, let me pause there for questions.
I mean, I was this looks incredibly robust. I mean, it's sort of, and of course, I'm guilty of looking through the sort of narrow lens of, a clinical research site. But, it almost, obviously, I love the EMR integration. You know how ridiculous it can be, like piecing together the stories by people's EMR records. It's just messy. So I love how sort of, clean this looks. And it's almost e-source. It almost is source, right? At this point, you're using it as such. I don't know. You hit me with a lot of stuff there. Impressive.
So first question, we have a system here where a patient can, as you said, fill out their information on their time, kind of in the comfort of their home. And it would expedite time at the clinic, which means our clinic could have higher throughput. They could help our patients. We could help with enrollment. Do you have a comparative analysis between the results of Clinicom and what might have happened in a clinical setting, like traditionally?
Yeah, actually, if you go to our website, there's a lot of stats on the homepage of how we increase retention rate, and improve no-show rates, improve time to stabilization. So all those stats are on the homepage of clinicom.com. Feel free to look through them. There's probably like 20 stats on that page, and those are based on hundreds and hundreds of thousands of users. So these aren't an N of 200. So this is after many years. Like I said, we've been developing this tool for over 20 years. Our chairman is a distinguished fellow of the American Psychiatric Association, child and adolescent psychiatrist. So we definitely have we're very data driven, and most of the decisions we make are data driven.
So, okay, follow-up question, because my mind is just going all over the place now. So do you have, and I noticed that you're, because I've worked with a number of sponsors that have done predictive modeling, diagnostic modeling, AI, something like that in healthcare, and FDA gets really tricky about that. They're still not quite sure where to do it. So I'm glad that you called it a data capture module, or something that will deliver data to the clinicians, where the clinicians are always in control. That's the direction that the majority of the sponsors or the vendors who are creating these technologies are going, because of the regulations in device management. With that, do you see a future where it's the combination of like the wearables, like the watches, like detecting your sleep and whatnot, and predictive modeling where you could predict potential suicidal thoughts based off of comorbidities. Be like, yeah, I noticed you haven't been sleeping very well for a month. How you feeling? We should probably do a suicide assessment. That kind of a situation.
We have one of the most elaborate suicide scales and algorithms in existence. One of our, an embarrassing story to share is everybody uses the Columbia Suicidality Rating Scale, right? Like that's the gold standard. I was actually sharing this with a doctor named Dr. Christopher Lucas, and I was sharing him our suicide algorithm and showing him why our algorithm was superior to the Columbia, because the Columbia, doesn't connect the dots between, hey, you're bipolar, add some weight to the suicide, or hey, you have access to a gun, or hey, you're transgender, or all the other variables that we all know and very well documented that also add in. And then he was like, Iggy, two things. One, you're right. And two, I'm the author of the Columbia Suicidality Rating Scale. So foot and mouth, right? And now he's at Syracuse, and Syracuse is using this at 56 campuses for all their patients on student telehealth. So we actually have triggers, and our clients can turn that alert system on or off for liability purposes. Some people don't want to be notified in advance, but we do, and they can set the bar at whatever trigger point they want. But we can automatically text or notify them if somebody's suicidal in advance. I wish, Brad, I could share. Let me see if I change screens. Can you guys see? Does it change for you guys?
Hasn't yet.
No,
because I'm just stuck on that one tab.
Yeah.
That's okay. But yeah, we do have a very exhaustive. So some points that I could just speak to. I can't put them on the screen, but for our suicide algorithm, for example, it adds points if you're bipolar, if you're schizophrenic or schizophreniform, or all the variants of bipolar. If you have substance abuse, it adds weights. If you have PTSD, it adds weight. If you have, if you're divorced or single, it makes a difference. If you're, depending on your sex. So there's, 60 different variables that we weigh into suicide, not just asking you 10 questions. The thing is, most of those variables are not questions faced by the patient or additional questions. It's just data that the algorithm is pulling from other parts of your assessment. So it's not extra questions. It's just intuitive. It knows where to pull data from and adds the weights. So it saves the patient from answering redundant questions.
So I've seen a study recently about how the newer generations feel more comfortable talking through their phone than in person. There's like a social development happening in these generations. And I'm wondering if answering these questions via an app or your phone will create more honest answers than if you were to have an in-person conversation.
I have a lot of examples of that. Every day we see a couple, or hundreds even. We've had abused women that put in their Clinicom. My husband comes to every doctor's appointment with me. He doesn't let me tell you guys, but he's beating me, right?
Oh,
or
man.
my father, my mother are abusing me, and here they put it in their Clinicom. Or another kind of opposite example is a kid that was recently came to one of the clinics, been seeing a board certified psychiatrist somewhere else, supposed to be an expert for 3 years. Everybody said he's just depressed and anxious teenager. He did his Clinicom, and there's an automatic system we call our 360 view, where a parent starts to do a Clinicom on a teenager, and options for them to do to ask their kid the similar questions, and they can opt in or out. And this parent opted in. The kid triggered the nihilistic ideations, and lo and behold, he had some symptoms of early schizophrenia at 15 years of age. Those guys are usually picked up at 25. So think about all the medications and 10 years of struggle we saved him just by him having a safe place to disclose something he didn't even know how to describe. I mean, a nihilistic ideation is when you feel like your guts are melting in the inside, and that's not a bellyache. It really took very specific questions to tease that out of him, and nobody stopped to ask. So we're uncovering an amazing assortment of data that one of the largest insurance companies in the country has called the most complete data set on the human condition. So, we're excited about the work we're doing, but even more excited about what we can offer to the life sciences space. The tool I have on the screen right now is, as a former CRO director, I used to work as a director for a global CRO, doing site selection, picking sites, picking investigators. And, my biggest frustration was always the site feasibility questionnaires. You get, I can get 100 patients in your study. And as you guys know, a third of sites don't produce anything. and to really see if a patient, and the other frustration is, I love the vendors to know, not trying to dog any of the recruitment vendors out there, but without naming any names, they give you a list of 100 patients and you still have to call and check inclusion exclusion over the phone as best as you can. And you might end up with 5 viable candidates out of 100 and wasting all that time on the phone or in person. So what we've created is a system where you can literally plug in the exact inclusion exclusion, run the pre-screening virtually to all your patients. And what I have on the screen is a sample of 5 kind of demo accounts where you can see how many they've screened, how many actually fit inclusion exclusion, what exclusions or inclusions they are failing. So you can actually do protocol amendments in advance or kind of dial in your protocol before you launch the study. As you know, amendments slow down studies and are the kind of the biggest rate limiting factor for a lot of studies. So you can kind of avoid amendments and avoid launching sites that don't actually have the patients. Instead of saying they have the patients, you can actually check if they do. And this is all FDA Part 11 compliant. But then we can sort the list by which patients actually meet inclusion exclusion. And so in this example, you'd be focusing only on the patients that have all green boxes, right? If they're failing a couple, why waste the time and take away one of your valuable screen fails that you may only have 4 of, right? And bring them in and actually do the screening and baseline and be more efficient. And this is one of the reasons why our research site for CNS is so successful and has been working with most of large pharma for 20 years, because we're not wasting time. We're screening people remotely and bringing in the right patients and enrolling very quickly.
Yeah, that makes perfect sense to me. I got some other questions on the side here if you want to hit those up. These are actually a string from Esther Howard of Bezel, who's badass if you've never had an opportunity to talk to her. But I'll throw them up on the screen here. So, outside of a clinical trial, what would prompt a patient, to answer these? Are they just something that's sent by their clinician? I guess used obviously outside of a clinical trial context, correct?
Yeah, so it's used in both. And Esther, that's a great question. So these assessments are not brought just by, let's just say, a sponsor or somebody else. Typically, these are sent by a trusted clinician, and the invitations don't come from Clinicom. So let's just use Dr. Bob as an example. The invitation would say, hey, Esther, Dr. Bob is asking you to complete a mental health online secure assessment so you can better assess your condition before your next visit, right? And so it's tailored to the location. And that's part of our secret sauce, honestly, was getting the engagement up to the high 90 percentile, and how we put the message and how we disclose it and how we tell the patient of how secure and encrypted it is, all helps us get to that 94% completion rate. That took us many years to kind of dial in. A lot of people look at our data and say, well, I can't even get somebody to answer questions for 10 or 15 minutes. How do you guys get engagement for half an hour?
Yeah, fair. She has a couple more here. Since it's a diagnostic tool, and giving you some props, calling it an amazing one. Are you also capturing other real world, outside of clinical trial? What kind of treatments and outcomes, I guess, and I guess it's kind of to tack on with their third question too, coupling with other data sets and data points, which you did kind of touch on a little bit, I believe. So can you talk a little bit about how that all interacts, or does it, or, kind of what does that look like?
So we are capturing the treatment in here. So it does capture the medications that the patient is taking. They are entered by the patient in the same format that we do for clinical research. So stop date, start date, dosage. It is tied to the FDA formulary. So when you're looking at the graph, you can tell, when drugs stopped or started. You look at all the past medications. So I can, on the data set side, pull statistics and say, show me all my patients and their scoring for everybody who's taking Prozac, right? And so that's data set that I can pull on the other side of my admin portal. But yeah, we are tracking this. And this is, we love the pharmaceutical companies that help support our business, but also it's a way to keep things honest, right? This is real world data coming in, and we're actually seeing the results of which treatments are superior, and a real, gathering the data in the same way we would for an FDA trial. So I always say this is like a phase 3B, a live phase 3B 24/7, right? And those are some of the most expensive studies to run, but we're pretty much gathering that same level of information autonomously and all the time.
I love it. All right. Well, what else you got? You got more to show us, or is it, you wanna call that?
That was. Can you hear me? I was muted.
Yeah. Sorry, we didn't.
Sorry, that was totally my fault. The information that you have here, is it 100% entered by the patient, or are there ways to integrate this into EMRs or to get it from medical records?
So there are many ways to get this. So one, we have FHIR and HL7 integrations for EMR. So all this data can be pumped into the EMR or an EDC for that matter, right? Secondly, the reports themselves can be easily, like say if you don't want to do an EMR integration and you just want to use this within your EMR, but you don't want to necessarily integrate it, you can literally hit this little icon here. I don't know if you guys can see the little bubble icon, and it will take all this data and put it in a clipboard, right? And then I can take this into a different section and copy, let's say, the conduct disorder information into the clipboard, and then just paste this into my EMR. So there's that way of taking data out without having to do a bunch of clicks. You can also quickly PDF this and PDF this whole document, and then just upload the file into your EMR. So there's ways to use it unintegrated, integrated. Most people, their main concern at the beginning is integration, and then 96% of our users end up not integrating with their EMR because it's so easy to use side by side without having to involve, big tech departments and things like that. But once again, we do integrate a lot. But most of our clients are smaller, 3 or 4 practitioner mental health providers that, feel like this saves them so much time that, instead of using the first visit to ask a bunch of subjective questions of your patient, that the line of questioning could be based on their specialty or the way they ask the questions. Now they have all that data walking into the room and can actually spend the first visit fixing and addressing problems rather than asking and collecting subjective data. So they don't mind an extra 2 clicks of doing this because it's going to save them so much other time on the front end.
So in a CNS world, where does this land with autism?
So we do intense screenings for autism, and let me kind of show you guys kind of under the skirt a little bit. So we do screenings for now. Autism does need to be verified by a clinician. There's further testing, but we do a very in-depth assessment for the various is it Asperger's, is it autism? There's many variants, and we are set up to do that. Let me kind of show you guys under the skirt a little bit. So I want to pick something very complicated so you understand that this is not a survey. So let's just pick PTSD because that's one of the most complicated algorithms. So, and this would work for autism, and I can put up any other condition here, but what you can see on the screen is, sorry, let me scroll to the top. There's a couple red lines here, and those red lines are exposure checks. So were you exposed to a traumatic event? Did you witness one? Did you indirectly or directly witness one? And if the answer is no to all the safety net questions, because we might ask that 2 different ways to make sure we don't drop any balls per se. If the answer is no, you might not get further PTSD questions. But if the answer is yes, it will go into the DSM criteria and start checking for intrusive thoughts, avoidance behavior, the negative alterations, dissociative symptoms, and then all the temporal aspects. How long have these symptoms been here? And then the output of the little red boxes on the right. So you can see from the right, you have acute stress disorder, PTSD with dissociative symptoms, PTSD, and all the different subvariants. So this would work the same for anything, any condition. So I cannot put all 100 and something algorithms that we have on one screen. It would just look like a spaghetti mess. But each of these algorithms are all triggered based on your chief complaint and secondary complaints. So this is an example of ADHD, right? This is not a survey. It's a very complicated algorithm that goes with the foundation of the DSM, and the DSM is the rule book, and we don't break the rule book. We just provide the data to the clinician, and it puts out the different kinds of potential ADHD and different attention. So you can see this is not a survey, and there's different weights and calibers. The other thing that's interesting is each question is not just a question. So we can actually interconnect questions with each other. Let's see if I can open one up without screwing it up here. Okay, so every question, we can ask it 3 different ways: first person, third party. We can actually add weights to, let's say if this question is connected to suicide, we can add a weight to it, or connect it to anything else. Right, so this particular question is just connected to itself, but it's the interweaving of the algorithms and weighing them next to each other that is so powerful.
It's got logic. It's got logic to it. You're not just
Yeah,
bombarding somebody with 100 questions. You're
Yeah.
building in some true,
you're only
logic.
getting questions that are relative to you. So let me show you a very light example of somebody who didn't need a bunch. Maybe just show you somebody basic. So for this example here, this patient didn't populate a whole lot, because guess what? He's not sick, right? So his report's a lot shorter, right? It just has some basic information. So this guy only took 32 minutes and answered 12 questions. It also has a quality report. So it tells you the time it took to complete the assessment. And that's also for billing, CPT codes, but also if it says, hey, 60% below average, I knew you blew through it, right? I know you were kind of speed answering, and the quality of the data, I might have to slow down and verify a little deeper. So it actually asks you, there's an actual standard that we've calculated over a decade of how long it should take to answer each specific question by the data, right? Which is really helpful. So the clinician can actually validate the information. I did give the example of a mom and a child reporting here, because we do assessments. I don't know if you can see the top right thing. It says patient mother at the bottom, but we can have multiple reporters. So I can send a Clinicom to your coach, your teacher, your counselor, and then get multiple reporters reporting on this at no extra cost. So you can actually see like the reality of the situation, because sometimes parents are oblivious to what's going on with their kid. So there's just many use cases. The other big use case is population health screening, right? We're working with some big municipalities right now that want to screen their entire population. Well, if I was to screen, let's say, I don't know, what is there, 8 million people in New York City? I'm just using that as an example. You could just enter any city there. And I need to hire, 40,000 psychiatrists to seeing 20 people a day to try to get through the list. In 5 years, maybe I might be able to get through everybody. But with Clinicom, I literally just send the link and triage the entire city in 72 hours. I can tell you who's suicidal, who needs services. And because resources are so limited, now you can actually triage the list by who needs it first, right? Who's suicidal, who's violent and aggressive, who's the school shooter. Find the needle in the haystack before something bad happens. So this is not vaporware. This is something developed by one of the leading CNS research sites in the country to really solve the equity and access issue in mental health.
I think Esther had one more question for you, and this is an interesting one. So this might be based off of your clinician or your clinics, but how do you prompt intervention in real time by anyone?
Yeah, so for sensitive conditions, for any condition that it triggers, the site we have an intake where through our onboarding process, we ask the site, hey, do you want to be alerted about suicide, aggression, and we give them a list. Go down the list and check the things that you want to be notified in real time about. They can opt in or out. The notifications can be sent to a specific text phone number. So let's say the clinician's direct cell phone, intake coordinator or care coordinator cell phone, or via a central email account that they monitor. And our support team is constantly monitoring those. So to make sure, let's say if you got one and you didn't do anything about it and didn't ping us, hey, we got it, we'll keep reaching out until it's addressed. And so we do that every single day.
Wow.
So let me ask you this. I'm a research site, research network. I do some CNS, but not a whole lot, and really hardly any psych. Does this still have some application beyond your sort of, bread and butter CNS psych sites?
So, for some gastric bypass surgeries, there's a requirement to do a mental health evaluation before the device is put in. So there's a
Spinal cord stimulation. I think they send a lot of those folks through
yeah,
for psych evaluation.
yeah. So there's a lot where they're going to hire an outside vendor or somebody else to just check the mental health, and a lot of those are surgical device or things that may have long-term consequences if you do have mental health issues. Aside from that, some emergency room interventions as well. So I don't know if you guys know this, but you're more likely to run into a librarian than you are a psychiatrist. Like 60% of the counties in the United States don't have a psychiatrist. So putting together something like this where you can actually empower the middle, as I call it, right? The social workers, the counselors, the people in the middle that are dealing with this every day that don't know what to do. And is this kid autistic, or is he Asperger's? Is he schizophrenic? Or do I send him to a psychiatrist and spend the bandwidth for the psychiatrist, or is he just depressed and just needs to see a primary care doc? So we're really empowering the middle, primary care, pediatricians, other people that also need to understand this, but maybe aren't trained in mental health, but need to be able to do the right care coordination and referral without spending a lot of money.
I mean, I love it. We're getting down to our last few minutes here. You got anything else you wanna show, or you?
Yeah, everybody's welcome to go to the website clinicom.com. There are some stats. You guys asked about some stats. They're right on the website of how we kind of increase engagement, capacity for sites, reduce ER usage. The one thing I wanted to point out was the who we help at the top of our page. And it's everybody from just your clinicians and researchers to digital health companies. So we can empower a lot of digital health companies that are out there trying to prove their case and prove the data. And so think of us as the intel inside to any one of those tools to help them do cheaper studies, right? Studies that are more affordable, to gather this data for them prospectively, and be able to empower them in the middle. We have a lot of substance abuse recovery organizations. We are empowering the largest TMS organization in the country right now. Many community settings, health settings, even population health or EAP programs. We did talk about life sciences, but down to the government and military as well. So the uses are many, and we're built to empower everybody at a very, very affordable cost. We don't charge by assessment. We charge per patient annually. So for a simple $12 anywhere on the planet, which we price it as the cost of lunch for most places on the planet, you can monitor a patient for a year, right? So it's not just one assessment. It's any assessment. If you want to check them weekly, daily, however frequently, for an entire year. So, very affordable for all people.
It seems very reasonable to me.
Yeah.
Man,
I love it.
I love it. I admit, like we had a conversation and we talked about it, on the audio, but it's so much more impressive to see and to walk through with the full context. I think again, it's really eye opening to me to be able to see what it's capable of. I don't know. I'm super impressed.
Mm-hmm. It's very, very well needed too. We really need this.
Yeah. Well, thanks,
I think again, so much broad applicability. I think, and again, I'm guilty of sort of having this incredibly narrow perspective, but I mean, it's not hard to see how this fits so well outside of a clinical trial context, and almost, I mean, hell, clinical trial context might be, the last thing, least important, quote unquote thing, that it's, has good use.
As a former coordinator myself, I love screening patients and I love doing it, but think about all the hours wasted on patients that don't fit. And this really saves your coordinators so much time so they can be more productive and help more people they can actually reach and help. And so we love that. And then for sponsors that are looking to really select sites that actually have their patients and don't just say so on an SFQ, that everybody's tired of getting that. But we really want to, like I said, empower the middle, empower everybody who, mental health affects everybody, right? It's not just if you don't have a mental health issue, there's somebody in your family or your community that it does, and that impacts you in a different way. So getting, I always say we're giving a voice to the voiceless. So safe way.
No, man, I love it. We're here. We're just about out of time here. I guess anything else to sort of close out, man? I don't know what else you could be said. I feel like you laid it up beautifully.
I would just caution people not to use. Sorry, let me say this in a different way. There's a lot of tools out there that just emerged in the last year or two. And I would bet whatever tool you're going to use, if it's Clinicom or something else, great. It doesn't matter if it's us or anybody else, but vet the tool, make sure it's got some science behind it, and it's not just a digitized stacked assessment, because there's now 1,000 companies out there that can digitize an assessment and put a library together. But how does a clinician know what to send? And then we also 10, 15 years ago, we try to stack assessments on top of each other. And we realized very quickly that people stop answering tone deaf questions if the questions are not particular to them. So be careful out there, just choose wisely and make sure there's some publication and some research behind what you end up using, and check references.
Beautiful. Dr. Fox, anything as we close out here?
I love that logic. Do your due diligence, make sure that you're selecting the best opportunity. I agree. There's an explosion of tech out there. A lot of, I call them EMR scrubbers, a lot of the patient recruiter people, they're out there, and sometimes it gets hard to get lost in the options. So I like that recommendation.
Yeah. Thank you guys so much for the time. Appreciate it.
Yeah, dude. Thank you so much for coming on. You guys, you can always check this out at notetofilepodcast.com. It's also on our YouTube channel. We'll be there forever, hopefully. And also stay tuned later in the week for Iggy's audio episode, which I feel like is unfortunately underwhelming compared to this, because I feel like this really kind of blew it out of the water, but that's okay. It'll be out later this week, so keep an eye open. And otherwise, thanks everyone for listening. Thanks for your comments and questions, and we'll be back next week. Thanks guys.